Hello, puppies and kittens. I'm speaking with Mark, who said on Facebook a couple of days ago that he could, using only physics, disprove claims of God's existence. And I was curious about that. Mark, thank you for taking my invitation to tell me more about your argument.
Well, anytime Aaron Ra wants to talk with me, I'm willing to talk.
Well, thank you. And are you a physicist yourself?
No, I'm not. I have very little formal education beyond 1 year of university, and most of what I've learned about physics has been in the past, I'd say 15 years, and it was through the YouTube with all the lectures and everything that I started following Sean Carroll and Lawrence Krauss and Brian Cox and Brian Greene. The list goes on and on.
I've seen a couple of them use physics to disprove God. So I guess you're going to be following the arguments that the kinds of arguments that they presented then.
Uh, yes and no. I base mine on the law of conservation of energy,
Okay.
which clearly states that energy can either be created or destroyed, which means it's always existed.
Yeah.
And if energy has always existed, and I relate this to a container, uh, and if energy always existed, the container for the energy is this universe.
So energy can, as some physicists have said, energy can be slowed down to become matter, or matter can be sped up to become energy. But in either case, it's not created or destroyed. And even in models of cosmogony that have a singularity, then that singularity is considered to be eternal. In one form or another, it always existed. There may have been, in some models, or some concepts of cosmogony, there may be a time before the Big Bang. In others, that's by definition impossible. But in some cases where there is a time before the Big Bang, there still is not a time before the singularity. The singularity always existed, was never created, was not the creation of the universe, just the inflation of the universe. And the only reason I bring that up is because I want to clarify for all the people who think or who frequently accuse us of atheists of believing that everything came from nothing, when I don't know any atheist alive who believes that.
And you won't get any physicists today to say that either.
One other
I
thing I
think,
want to throw out there is that when you say that you have an argument from physics, and you also come up with the admission that you are not a physicist, there will be some believers in there who will automatically discount the argument, having not yet heard it, simply because you're not a physicist. However, I would caution them that those who have a Master of Divinity degree, or who have a Bachelor of Philosophy degree, or let's be frank, if they have an ordination from Trailer Park Ministries, they'll think that they're able to out argue every physicist and biologist and geneticist and geologist. And so we could talk to regular people and evaluate the arguments without it always having to be an argument from authority. So I'm keen to hear your argument, sir.
well, I'll reiterate it. Energy can either be created or destroyed, which means it's always existed. And if the energy's existed, so is the container. We call that universe. Now, universe is very plausible that it can go through phase transitions. We experienced one some 14 billion years ago in the last inflationary event. But that doesn't mean that that's, like you said, that's not the beginning. And no physicist says the inflation model is the beginning of everything, because there was a prior state of universe. And you mentioned a few of them, like the singularity, and there's other models too. One in particular that I'm trying to get my head around, and I halfway agree with, is Ethan Siegel's model of inflation starting before t equals 1. He actually has a graph that pushes it back in time, so to speak, where the inflation starts and then t equals 1 kicks in, and then it really goes. I kind of like that. Lawrence Krauss, did you watch his lectures on the universe from nothing when that book came out around 2012, 2013?
I actually shared a stage with him at one point shortly after that, and I watched him give one of those lectures two or three times in different venues, because we happened to be doing the speaking circuit together. Yeah, likewise, I've also seen Sean Carroll do a similar argument where we have this mathematic equation that I use in my unapologetic science series, wherein he says that this is the evidence that there's no such thing as a soul, and he says that scientists like to back away from that because they say there's no data. Here's the data. When he presented that argument, I'm proud to say I happened to be in the room. He was at a humanist convention in San Diego at that time.
I may have seen that video, but Lawrence brought up an interesting point in the lecture that he was introduced by Richard Dawkins, and Richard called him the Woody Allen of science or physics.
Yes, I did see that one.
Oh, I got a
I
big.
was not in the room. I just watched that on video with everybody
Yeah.
else.
Okay. In the lecture, Lawrence described a party where you bought a case of beer and you forgot to put it in the fridge, and the guests are walking in the door, so you stick it in the freezer, and then you forget it, and then you remember, and by the time you take it out and take the bottle out of the freezer, it goes through a phase transition. And he likened that to the Big Bang, saying that it's plausible that what we call the Big Bang is a phase transition from a prior state.
Okay.
And I went, yep, that's for sure. I can't see any other way for that to happen. Then a couple of years ago, I caught a Sean Carroll interview, and he stated that the universe is most plausibly acausal and past infinite. Now, he did say that. And I went, beautiful. So that's where I get my data, from Krauss and Carroll primarily. And if the universe, now getting to the God issue, if the universe is acausal, any claims of divine creation are dead. They're impossible, not just implausible, they're also become impossible. And
I'm personally convinced that anytime we've ever found the real explanation for anything that we used to believe was supernatural. I mean, the comets were thought to be omens, epilepsy was thought to be a demonic possession, and so forth. Volcanoes, of course, were gods. We thought that the stars had personalities and all of that. So, but when we figured out what the real answer was, it was always a revelation of whole new fields of study that were previously unimagined. And while it may be that in our limited scope, we might never figure out if there was an origin of the universe, whether there was or what it was, if there was, that to me doesn't matter so much as the probability that if we ever did find that answer, it too would be a revelation of new understanding that is so far beyond our previous notions of gods and ghosts and supernatural things as to measure the divine to be absurd.
To me, it is.
Yes.
And, but I guess I got lucky earlier in life in that I was raised Catholic, what I call Catholic light.
What is that? Episcopalian? Methodist?
No, Roman Catholic.
Okay.
An actual Roman, I call it Catholic light. My dad never, ever, ever mentioned God, the church, nothing. My mom was the believer. Okay. She talks about guardian angels and, God looking over us, and we had to go to church. And this is me recollecting. Okay. When I was living it, I didn't see that my dad never said anything about it. So around 12 or so, 13, 14, I just said, I'm not going to church anymore. I'm done. And I told it to my mother. And she told my dad what I had said. And he confronted me on it. And I said, Dad, you can do what you want, but I'm not going back. Deflated him severely. All the wind was knocked out of him, and he just turned around and walked away, and he never, ever mentioned it again. To his credit.
My family took me to church one time. No, well, I can remember being in church as I have fleeting memories of being in a church. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 times, perhaps, but I do have fleeting memories of that. So very rare occasions when I was very young, maybe. But I remember being 11 and we were not in the habit of going to church. And that's when I heard the preacher say something that I knew to be a lie. And he's just doing what preachers do. He's pretending to know things there's no way that he can know. But he's not saying that I believe X. He's saying that X is a fact. Like, there's no way he can know that. And so that makes it a lie. And when I try to point that out, to my family, I ended up getting punched in the gut and dragged out of church. Because you don't
Yes,
question the man behind the podium.
you don't question that. I recall a video where you said something very, very similar. Turned it into a little bit of humor. It's like, you don't know how strong your grandma is until she gives you a whack in the solar plexus. I remember that. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Before we carry on, I have to say this: your systematic
Classification of life.
classification. Thank you. I've only watched it 6 times. Okay, is a tour de force. How you did not get an honorary degree from somewhere just based on that opus, it rankles me. That deserves far more recognition than it's getting.
Well, I appreciate that. I couldn't have gotten a degree from it because that would be a bad precedent to set, I think.
Well, even an honorary, just an honorary degree.
Well,
I have to, like, I've watched it 6 times, and there's so much information in there that every time I watch it, I found out something new from it. Could be maybe because I might have a learning disability or something. I don't know, but it's I enjoyed it, and I do enjoy it to this day.
yeah, well, thank you very much. I've noticed kind of a similar thing when I read through, like, when I read something I've already read before, I will pick up things that I didn't pick up before. I remember reading the Gospels for like the 4th time and like thinking, how did I miss this? So
That's why I rewatch lectures a lot.
gosh.
Like, I'll rewatch a Sean Carroll lecture 2 or 3 times, Lawrence Krauss, Brian Greene.
That is the advantage of doing a channel like this. I mean, we're just a couple of guys. Neither one of us have physics education. We're pontificating about what we understand. But the nice thing is that it doesn't come down to our opinions, because if somebody who's educated in this field will come on and say in the comments, for example, this is what you got wrong, and they'll be able to show what the actual argument is, or what the counter evidence is, or whatever, then I will accept that, hey, somebody with a degree and a better understanding is correcting me on this, especially if they're going to do so directly, because I mean, what a rare opportunity is that. But I think that's very different from the make believers, for whom they don't care any degree of education. They don't care what overwhelming science. They don't care. They're going to continue to believe a fairy tale that has already been disproved, knowing that it has been disproved.
I could not hold on to a view once I'm corrected properly that it's wrong. I got to drop it and adopt the proper, true view. It's unavoidable for me.
For me, when I find out that the reason that I believed something wasn't well enough supported to warrant belief, I've already stopped believing. You don't even have to prove it wrong. If I didn't have good enough to reason to believe it, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mr. Grenet, I don't think we can go any further with this topic. If there's a closing comment you'd like to make, we'll go ahead and do that and close it up.
Not really. Just thank you for having me. I hope that you feel this worthy of airing on your channel at some point in the future. And if you decide to air it, can you let me know when it's going to air?
Thank you. I will do.